Hey guys, it's Lisa and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to make over some things for some Christmas decor, and I want to start with this window that I've had in my stash for a while. I painted it white, and my plan was to put these transfers on here. Now the window, I didn't paint it on camera because it was already painted in my stash, so I'm not sure why I abandoned that project, but for some reason I did. And this transfer set here is a Dixie Belle transfer, and I think it's called Timber something. I can't remember the name of it, but I will look that up and add it in the description. But it comes with 4 pieces, but I've already tried to put one of these pieces on and messed up. So what I did was, after I got it transferred on, I used the plastic to try to burnish it on, and I guess I got a little too rough and didn't make sure that it was down good, and I ended up peeling some off. So I'm going to make these 3 pieces work, and that will make it a little bit unbalanced, but with the wording on it that I'm going to be adding, I think that I'm going to be able to make that work just fine. You just have to piece them together kind of like a puzzle, and once you get your picture the way it needs to be, then you can just put them down in that order, and they actually go together really seamlessly. And I'm loving these cool, crisp winter colors, and for that reason, I'm not going to make this one limited to Christmas at all. I just want this one to be more of a winter piece. And so what I'm going to do is finish putting this transfer on, and then once I get this on, then I'm going to add a stencil to the top. Now, obviously, after I get the transfer on and the stencil, this will need to be sealed. So I'm just going to give it a couple of coats of a clear satin finish. I think when it comes to larger items like this, especially windows for some reason, I think it helps to do something that isn't limited to holiday, because a lot of times people don't like to store windows, and so maybe because of the size and because of them being glass, maybe they don't store that well. But I think making this something that can be left out for a while will give it a better chance to sell. And many of you know my favorite scripture is "Be still and know that I am God," and to me, with this kind of mountainous type scene, I just think that goes perfectly with this image. So I have this stencil, and although it's not laid out the way it needs to be laid out for this window, that's usually not a problem, because you can usually just kind of piece them together the way that you think they look good, and they work. So if you have stencils, don't feel like you're limited to the space that they have. Just kind of look at your piece and see where you can rearrange the words and make it work. And I'm using black Stazon ink and a makeup brush to apply this. Now you could use paint, but paint is just, for me, really hard to get the crisp lines that you get when you're using the Stazon ink. And you can actually use any ink, but I find that the Stazon is much less likely to bleed when you do your top coat, and it also is less likely to fade on your item. So I just let that dry well, and then I can even brush my clear coat over that without worrying about it fading when I use the Stazon ink. And although you could definitely do this on a clear window, I just think it shows up much better when you have a white background. And so that's why I decided to go ahead and paint it first. Most of the time now I do that. I used to do a lot of windows without painting the glass, but I like the look of the painted glass more. And here is my first item complete. And I forgot to mention that I did take my little finger sander and sand around the frame of the window. Now my next item is this little tote, and it was in a wedding. Actually, I think this was in my sister's granddaughter's wedding. And a lot of times you can get these very cheap after a wedding because they don't really have anything that they want to do with them after that. So I just sanded the writing enough to where paint will cover it. And then I'm going to give this, actually I gave this one coat of clear coat first because I didn't want to take a chance on that wood bleeding through. So I just gave this a really good coat of clear coat and let it dry really well. And then I gave it 2 coats of the color cotton. And then once that dried well, then I added a transfer to each side. And I just used the pine cones and pine only of the transfer called Cardinals. And it has the Cardinals obviously on it and some poinsettias, but I wanted just these simple little pine cones with the pine needles. And what I did is I just put some on each side, and I didn't worry about covering the whole thing because I want to put some lettering on this that says hot cocoa. And so I'm leaving room for that. But I wanted each side to be dressed up just a little bit. And so just one of these little transfers worked well for each side. And then once I had one on each side, then I just took my little finger sander and went over each of these slightly so that it would kind of burnish it in even more. And then I also went around all the high spots and did some light distressing on the box. And then I took this large stencil that I have that I could just pull the words hot cocoa out of, and so on one side I put hot cocoa, on the other I put hot cocoa and apple cider. And I also decoupaged one layer of this beautiful napkin that I got from Amazon, and I'll link that in the description. But I took some Mod Podge and glued it to the bottom and then went over it with another coat of Mod Podge, and that tied the inside to the outside. And I used black Stazon ink to stencil the lettering on. And then once this was all finished, then I gave it a good coat of top coat, and I just used a Dixie Belle satin finish top coat to finish this off. I like how it turned out, and like I said, those packets of hot cocoa and apple cider fit just perfectly down inside. But I also wanted to dress up the top of this, so I'm just going to make a little simple spray that I can glue to the top of this. And I want to, I don't want this to be permanent because even with that inside, I think this is something that could work fine throughout the year if you don't have the greenery on the top. So I'm just hot gluing this all together and making a very simple little spray. I'm just putting a little bit of greenery on each side and then a different kind of greenery. And I think I use a few different little types of greenery and some berries and just make this a very simple spray. You could also wire it together, but because this is so small and lightweight, I didn't worry with wiring it together. I just glued everything in place. So I just kept adding to each side here until I felt like it was full. And then I added some pine cones and berries, or I think maybe just a pine cone and berries. And then to place this on, because I don't want it to be permanent, and I don't want to drill a hole in it, because again, I feel like that would be permanent, or obviously it would be permanent. And then I didn't really like the look of trying to wire it around the top. So I had to get creative, and I decided to cut a strip of white fabric and glue that around, and then glue my little spray onto that, and that worked perfectly. But I did have to make sure that when I glued that little strip of fabric on, that I glued only fabric to fabric, because I didn't want to to leave any glue when that was pulled off, so that all you have to do is just cut that little strip of fabric off. And you'll see as I do it here how simple that is. And so all that you're running is that little strip of fabric, and then if you want to put it back on, then you just put you another strip of fabric on it. But that was just my solution here. I hadn't decided if I'm keeping this or if I'm going to sell it, but I did know that I didn't want this little spray to be permanent. Now I could have added some a snow look to this spray, but I really liked the darker on this, and I liked having a lot of contrast, and I just left it like it was. The berries that I put on it had a little bit of frosting on them anyway. And here it is finished. And again, these little packets, I've got them kind of raised up there, but if you put them side by side, you can fit several in this, and they fit just perfectly. So I had this little strainer in my stash, and it's on the older side, but I wouldn't really call this vintage. I wanted to give it a better look, so I sanded that wood handle, and now I'm going to add red to this, and this is just a regular red. And so I'm going to give it 2 coats of the red. And I want this to have more of a vintage look, and because of that, after that paint is dry, after my second coat is dry, then I'm going to take my little finger sander and add just a little bit of distress to it, and then I'm going to finish it off with some brown wax. And that will still keep this red color, but give it a little bit more of an antiqued look. And I even thought about adding some rust to the metal, but I decided in the end that I just wanted to keep it the metal color. Now I have a few of these cardinals in my stash, and I get these at the Dollar Tree, or I used to. They have this one and a blue one, and you guys have seen me make many of the blue ones over, but they don't have a specific shape the way the cardinal does, so I generally buy mostly blue. But I did have 3 or 4 of these in my stash, and I'm going to make them over and use them in my Christmas decor. Now the red that comes on them, I'm not crazy about it. It's not a bright enough red, so I'm taking this same red and going over that to brighten that little bird up. And while that's drying, I'm going to go ahead and start working on this little strainer. Now I wanted to start with a nest, although I'm going to be adding a lot more to this nest, but I wanted something for the little bird to set in. But I also wanted to make my bird look more like a cardinal, so I just looked this one up on my phone, and so I needed to brighten that red up, but I also need to put some black around the face. So in order to do that, I just took a very small brush and some black Stazon ink and just painted that little triangle on each side of the head. And I also brought some of that black down around the beak at the bottom. And then I used some of that same ink and did some shading into the wings and tail. Also a little underneath the bird. And I also brought some of it just around the beak, and just that little bit made this look more realistic. But I took my brush then and add just little bits of black into some of the feathers, and that gave it a much, much better look. And then I just dry brushed just a tiny bit of white in some areas to add some little highlights to the feathers as well. And then I think that made him look a lot more Christmassy. And I think the reason I decided to make these little cardinals over now is because I don't think that they sell that well, but I thought it would be a good chance for them to sell during the holidays. And here's where Winston decided to come up on the table and check out the bird. He wasn't very impressed with it. And now the bird is Christmassy, but the nest not so much. So it's time to start adding some decor to that. Now I've glued the nest down, and now I'm going to glue the bird to the nest. And now the bird fits well into the holiday decor, but the nest not so much. It doesn't have any character at all, but we're going to take care of that by adding some Christmas greenery and berries and pine cones. Now, most of this greenery that I'm using, just like with some of the other ones, some of the other projects I did in this video, is thrifted by my sister, so I won't be able to link this in the description. I will link what I can, but again, a lot of this has been thrifted. So I want to make this really full, and I'm just going to keep gluing these little sprigs of, I guess this is cedar, around until I get the fullness that I want, and then I'll start filling in with some of the other greenery. I don't really have a specific theme today in my video. I just had some of these projects that I wanted to get out of the way, and I wanted to get something made in this little strainer. I also wanted to get something done with that window, but my main purpose was to get these little birds ready to sell. Now, I don't know who invented hot glue, but what did we do before hot glue? I remember using tacky glue, and I thought that stuff was really good. And but once I started using hot glue, I just don't know how I did anything without it. Now, I love how this little greenery has that tip that is almost a chartreuse green, but it just really pops, and I think that it really makes this little bird stand out. And I think it pairs well with this little bit of greenery, and this is more of a plasticky looking greenery, so it's one that I wouldn't use by itself, but it works good to just kind of pop some of that green in around the other. Now this is a piece that could hang on the wall, or I've even put these in little plate stands before, and they'll stand up good on a plate stand. Now once I get everything added to this, I'm going to add some berries and a pine cone or two. And then once I get the fullness that I want, then I'm just going to take some white paint on a small brush and just dab it here and there all over it until I get the effect of snow that I want. Now I could have taken this further and even sprinkled some fake snow on it while it was wet. I could have sprinkled some Epsom salts on it while it was wet, or I could have even sprinkled some snow glitter on it. But I just like this natural look of this, and I didn't really want even the Epsom salt on this one. I just like the look that I got once I got enough white. And what I did is I just kept adding a little at a time until I felt like I had all the contrast that I wanted. And then once I was happy with how the inside looked, I just took a little spray that I took off an ornament that I made over from Walmart, and just tied that around the neck of the handle, and this one was complete. Then I had this little bird on a spindle, and it's that same cardinal that I got from the Dollar General. Now I've already painted this one over to match the one that I did on the last one. I actually did 3 birds like that, and I'll be doing another one in my last project. Now I wanted to brighten this one up, so I'm painting this little spindle that I've already clear coated with 2 coats of the color cotton. Then once that was dry, I took my little finger sander and distressed around the high spots to bring out some of those dark areas. And then I just started adding some bits and pieces of greenery underneath the little bird. So I just took some hot glue and just kept adding little sprigs until I got the fullness that I wanted underneath. And I also used some of the lighter and darker greens on this one. And I thought about at first putting a little disc underneath the bird so that I would have something larger to glue my greenery on, but as it turned out, I had so many little pockets underneath that it worked perfectly, just adding a little hot glue and little sprigs at a time, and just sticking them back in there, and it just, all this greenery just kind of stuck out and gave it the fullness that I wanted without adding much weight at all. So what I was worried about is this being a little top heavy, and it turns out to be not top heavy at all. And I'm loving how this little cardinal looks against this white. I was kind of on the fence about whether or not I should paint that little base, but I'm so glad that I did, because it just really, really helped to make this pop. I have such a hard time sometimes coming out of my comfort zone, because I am such a neutral decorator that sometimes I'm afraid of color, and but in cases like this, I'm glad that I went outside the box when it comes to what I like, because I actually really do like this. And it's funny that I felt like I needed a disc under here, because I just kept adding and kept adding. And again, these little pieces are so small and so lightweight that it didn't add too much weight at all. And I got so much fullness without having that disc. And then I just finished this off by taking a strip of gingham fabric that I had just torn into strips and tying a simple knot around the bottom. And then I decided in the end that I wanted just a little bit more greenery to break up some of that red, so I added just a few more sprigs with some hot glue. And then again, I was very, very happy with the end result. This one you could also add some snow to. I kind of liked it without snow, so I left it just as is. And then I had one more cardinal that I wanted to do a little bit more of a rustic look with. So I had this little length of a limb that my husband had cut for me. And so I want to do one on top of this little wood piece. And I had a little half sphere of this foam, and I'm just going to glue that to the top so that I can add my greenery to it. I felt like this one was going to need a little bit more substantial, so I glued that on, and then I took some moss and covered the styrofoam with the moss. But before I added the moss, I decided that I wanted to drill a hole in my little bird. It's resin, so you can drill a hole in it. And then I took a little stick and stuck it up inside the bird and down into that styrofoam, so that I could raise up the bird just a little bit, because I knew if I kept adding more greenery that it would hide that bird, and I felt like he needed to be elevated. And then here is where I just took some hot glue and just kept adding moss to cover all that styrofoam. And then I pretty much did the same thing with this that I did with all the others, and I just kept adding greenery. So I added different shades of greenery and different styles of greenery and berries and pine cones. So I guess my theme, if I had to have one, would be pine cones and berries. But I just kept adding this until I got the fullness that I wanted. And here I'm using a piece from a pick, and this was one that I've had for quite some time, just a piece of a pick actually, but it had the wiring on it, and that gives me a good opportunity to kind of wrap that around and add what looks like little twigs. Now when I think of this one, I think of maybe a centerpiece for a rustic table, because this would make such pretty holiday decor at your tables, even on the dinner table, because you could add some different heights, and you wouldn't have to just do the cardinals. but this one just has so many possibilities, I think. I had so much fun creating this one, and actually had a lot of fun creating all of these. And it's such a great opportunity to use up some of these tiniest bits of pieces of picks that you have left over or other greenery. And although I didn't do it on this one, I think this probably could have benefited from some snow. And again, I didn't do it. And when I looked at the photo from the finished product, I guess I'm seeing that it needs some snow. And although I really, really like how this one turned out, I do think that I will probably go back and take a brush with some white paint on it and just kind of dab it here and there to add a snowy look. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you in the next. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great evening, and God bless you and your family.